Hello, I'm Chuck Wolf, Chief Executive for Charles J. Wolf Associates, LLC. As a motivational speaker and a leadership consultant and executive coach and trainer, I often work with very successful people in their companies. Since many can't afford a professional, I volunteer to host a radio talk show called The Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel, on a nonprofit community radio station in Bridgeport, Connecticut, WPKN. My reason for doing the show is to share with as many people as possible this wonderful process for helping people manage their own emotions and their relationships with others. My goal is for everyone listening to learn to use the Emotion Roadmap to make life better. As you listen to me, help others, I hope you are also learning. As a Simsbury resident, I'm delighted to be able to make the show available through Simsbury TV. To learn more, go to my website, www.emotionroadmap.com. Thank you for listening and watching.
Hi, this is Chuck Wolf. You're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM, listener-supported radio. This is Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel, the Emotion Roadmap. This is a show about helping people deal with challenging situations that involve strong emotions. This morning's show is going to not be a call-in as it typically is. It's going to be an interview show. And we're going to be talking about a couple of different things that relate to gun violence, mental health, and social and emotional learning. As many of you know, I've talked on the air before about how do you help people to feel the way you want them to feel, and how do you help yourself to feel the way you want to feel. So with all the issues that are happening with shootings, mass shootings that we've experienced, I thought it'd be a timely show to have a couple of guests on who will talk to this from the Sandy Hook Promise perspective. And Doug MacLeod, who is now working with us in part-time as an underwriter, is actually authored the idea. And we also have with us Mark Barden, who is a principal in the Sandy Hook Promise, who had lost a son in that horrific event, and also has taken the responsibility to try and change the world and make a meaningful difference in so many ways. I'm going to give Mark a chance to talk about that. So I just want to share a few of my own thoughts regarding the whole idea of what's happening in the world around this topic. And one of the things that I know for most people is when you see someone who's a stranger shoot other strangers, you have to think that person's crazy. In fact, that person may or may not be diagnosed as crazy, according to the literature in psychology and psychiatric diagnostic glossaries. So what the point I want to make is that sometimes people who are mentally ill, suffering from mental abnormalities, are dangerous, but often many of those people aren't as well. And people we haven't classified sometimes show up as violent, potentially to themselves or to others. And that's a different designation. So I want to make the distinction that as we're looking at some of the new laws that are being proposed or actually exercised, red flag laws, it seems like we're going after the right targets in the sense that we're looking at people potentially that are violent or express violence towards others or potentially violent towards themselves. So I want to make that distinction. I also want to talk about being proactive in the sense that if we have good laws, whether it's universal background checks or it's red flag laws that target people who are potentially violent to try and take guns away through due process, or however we approach this, that's one strategy. Another strategy is being long-term proactive in the sense of some of the things that are happening with Sandy Hook, with the programs in schools, and I'll ask Mark to talk more about that. Also, some of you have heard me talk with Mark Brackett, who's the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence at Yale University, about their Ruler program, which is a social and emotional learning program. My own background, I want to point out, was as an elementary school counselor working with young children way back when, many, many years ago, trying to help them deal with the feelings of anger, humiliation, embarrassment, depression, so many of the feelings that we all struggle with today. The idea was to try and bring groups of people together and talk to them proactively about how do you deal with these events when you experience them and they cause you to have these very challenging feelings. Has anybody ever had any positive success in dealing with those feelings? When I had a group of people, young kids talking to each other, and what I established was a very safe environment, I found it didn't matter what religion, race, color, ethnicity, or what kind of category of student they fell into, whether special needs, athlete, musician, techie, didn't matter. All these kids all struggled with the same emotions and really had some challenging times trying to figure out what do they do with their anger? What do they do if they get embarrassed? But the amazing thing was when I asked the group to share their experiences, it kind of brought everybody together. And I think that if we encourage more social emotional learning in schools, that we proactively create a healthier culture. I know with Ruler, the program at the Yale University that's promoting in lots of schools, including in Bridgeport here in Connecticut, the examples of the benefits are amazing. You have more socially responsible behavior. You have less drug use, less alcohol use, less bullying, less prone to violence, all kinds of benefits. And I think that if we can encourage all our schools to do something along the lines of what Ruler proposes or Sandy Hook school programs propose or others that are similar with such amazing results, I think we go a long way to changing the culture and changing the world in that way. So as all of you know, the show's about creating, in a sense, inner peace and hopefully if we can help you create inner peace for yourself, we get outer peace, and we sure could benefit from that today as well. I want to give Doug MacLeod a chance to talk now about his role. He's joined with the Sandy Hook Promise in a way as a volunteer, and he is also someone who has gotten to know the people in Sandy Hook, and we're going to be talking with Mark Barden after Doug. So Doug, if you would say a little bit about your role as a volunteer, and then introduce Mark, and then we'll allow Mark to have the forum for a while, just talk about what Sandy Hook's doing, the results they're showing, and why it's making a difference and how others can get involved.
Thanks, Chuck. Thank you very, very much for having me and inviting Mark on. I became part of the Sandy Hook Promise Foundation as a Promise leader back in 2016, and I did so just because, like many people in the U.S., we when faced with these tragedies, we often feel powerless about what can we do. We look to our leaders. We ask them to do something, but one of the great things about the Sandy Hook Promise is that it gives individuals, such as people who want to work in their community to help prevent gun violence, to prevent accidental discharges, prevent suicides, to do something with their schools and their communities. So one of the first things I did, I'm not really, don't look like a runner. This is radio, but I'm what they would call a Clydesdale, and I joined up to raise a little bit of money for the Sandy Hook Promise Foundation and ran the New York City Marathon in 2016. And it was one of the most formative experiences of my life because I was able to meet the team at Promise House. I ran 26.2 miles. Every dollar that we raised went to educate one child or one educator to recognize the signs of violence and gun violence. And so we and my teammates felt that we were actually doing something. Since then, I've been trying to work with schools as well as other educators and people just to recognize what the signs of violence look like, because they, from the students' point of view, they can become empowered to recognize what people who are in crisis look like, and then take using the Sandy Hook Promise Know the Signs tools can actually get help for those people before something happens. So it's a preventative program. It's not about doing anything except for empowering kids to protect themselves and others.
Doug, could you just say a little bit about how do you get involved? If somebody else thinks that they'd like to do something that they feel makes a difference along these lines, how do you get involved as a volunteer?
I'm glad you asked that question because it's a really important step. The first thing that I did was I went to the Sandy Hook Promise website, and the first thing that I did, which the website asks everybody to do, is to simply make a promise, right? To make a promise to do all we can to prevent gun violence in our communities, so that nobody has to go through, what Mark and his family and the Sandy Hook families have gone through. It's a simple promise. You do it online, and everybody has time and talents, right? So you can do as little as you want or as much as you want. And so that was really the first step. It gave me resources to look at, gave me the facts, and then that propelled me on to explore other ways that I could get involved. So I simply just went to sandyhookpromise.org and made a promise.
And could you say anything about the feelings you again, the show is about feelings and about emotions. And so you went into this with some emotion. You wanted to prevent something. You had a sort of a compelling interest and a curiosity maybe, and also an interest in feeling like you were doing something that that mattered, that somehow was going to be helpful. And so how did it change how you felt about it once
Well,
you got
I think as a
involved?
country, we were all dreadfully sad. I mean, we beyond, it was an unimaginable tragedy, and something that we couldn't really comprehend. So as I wasn't alone. Many other people, felt that we were powerless to do anything.
Right.
But what the Sandy Hook Promise and other charities have given us is not only a voice but actually tools to kind of work with kids, educators to again understand the mechanics of what is going behind some of these actions. As you were saying, people who are unwell, or I don't really use the word crazy. I'm not a but people who are unwell tend to be the victims of violence rather than to be the perpetrators of violence. So
Right.
there's a lot of dog whistling that goes on in various quarters. We don't get involved really in that, but to try to determine really what is real, what we can do to affect change. Again, if we don't change anything, nothing will change. So, what can we do as individuals at a grassroots level? We can get involved. We can make a promise. We can go to meetings. We can communicate what some of these programs look like that the Sandy Hook Promise Foundation provides us. There's over 6,000. I think, Mark, I'm correct in saying, promise leaders out there doing various levels of community organization, working with school districts, working with educators to, again, put in place these programs to know the signs of violence before they happen, and then put in tools to help kids identify what threats are, and really kind of work towards resolutions before anybody gets hurt. So
So how does it change your feelings now that you've been involved for several years? How are you feeling about your involvement?
I'm working with the best people, in the world who are concerned, I think, with the most significant, health, health concern in our country. Right now, not just with mass shootings, but 60% of gun violence deaths are through suicides, and so we are helping people at the Sandy Hook Promise at the high school and even middle school level identify people at risk. So that's tremendously. It feels good to do that, and to be in the company of others who share those concerns and those objectives to get those tools to the schools, because the programs don't come at any cost to the community. They're all funded by people who run marathons and kind of raise a few bucks in doing that, but also through outside organizations who share those concerns as well. So again, there's no friction. The school district doesn't need to come up with millions of dollars for hardening their schools. The kids are really what drive these programs, and they do a good job.
Well, you sound proud and engaged to me, and I also want to thank you for one of the steps you took was to alert me to the possibility of having a show about this, and I think it's very timely. And I had a chance to talk with you and with Mark just before we came in, and I was really pleased to hear too that one of the things that concerns me sometimes is the level of the level of respect sometimes and civility is missing between, it seems like, different factions. And yet I don't think anybody could argue, as you pointed out earlier, Mark, with school safety. And yet when we think about some of the things that are said back and forth, we demonize certain groups sometimes on both sides of the aisle. And I think it's really important if we're trying to change feelings and we're trying to get support and get people to join together to make a difference. So often a tragic event happens and the same talking points come out. and it's consistent, and it's hard, and it's wonderful to hear that some groups like Sandy Hook are having a real difference and making a difference. So if you don't mind, Doug, would you introduce Mark, and then I'll ask Mark to talk for a bit.
Well, I'm going to introduce Mark Barden, who's the co-founder and managing director of the Sandy Hook Promise. Don't need a whole lot of introduction. Thank you very much for all the work that you do.
Thank you, Doug. And it's a pleasure to hear you speak on behalf of Sandy Hook Promise. You really know your stuff. I've worked with you in a supporting role around your amazing work with the marathon, both as a participant and as a supporter. And to hear you speak from your personal experience of how you came to Sandy Hook Promise, feeling powerless and helpless in the face of this issue that is facing our country, and is such a challenging one for so many reasons. That you were able to get past that feeling of helplessness and powerlessness and come to our website and think, what can I do? Excuse me, and then find that, oh yeah, there are opportunities to get involved and get engaged and to make a difference. And I want to applaud you and thank you for doing that. You've been with us all along as an amazing volunteer, which is how we get a lot of our work done. As you mentioned, we are 100% donor funded. We are able to bring our programs to schools across the country at no cost to the schools, thanks to the donors and thanks to the support of folks like you. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate not only you giving us this opportunity to speak with Chuck today, but also for all the work you've done for us.
It's an honor.
We also have one of my daughters has made the commitment to Sandy Hook monthly to be a donor, to what she can afford, and she's very excited that we're doing this show. So,
That's great.
so I'm gonna
please tell her thank you.
Yes, I sure will. I sure will.
And that's true. That is how we do every bit of our work. We bring our life-saving neuroscience programs into schools across the country at no charge, and it's only because of folks like your daughter and Doug who help us do this work.
Thanks. If you could tell us a little bit about. I think there's a lot of people that have heard Sandy Hook, the words, but they certainly know about the event, but they don't really know a lot about your organization. So if you could give us a little background about your organization and talk about some of the amazing achievements that you've accomplished over the last number of years.
Sure. How much time do we have? We have an amazing team, and we have a rich and growing database of wonderful accomplishments that I'm very proud of, and it's also very personal to me in that
Sure.
it is a very tangible way for me to honor my son Daniel, who was shot to death in his first grade classroom at Sandy Hook Elementary on that December 14th, 2012. That will be burned into it has rewired me as a person. It's like changed my DNA, and I can't describe what that's like, what that does to you. And so that is really one of the most compelling reasons that I want to continue to do this work, is that not only to honor Daniel and to prevent other families from living this pain, but we know that this is preventable, and we know through our work that we are preventing these horrible atrocities from happening. We have a growing database of actual school shootings that we have stopped, and so there are those little towns across the country, like you say now. Sandy Hook is such a recognizable name.
Right.
Nobody knew before. There are lots of little towns out there across the country that nobody will know the name of, because a horrible tragedy didn't happen there, because of students in that town or that community who were trained in our Know the Science programs and were empowered to take those next steps to prevent that from happening.
Well, you're kind of an amazing story, and the concept of an emotion roadmap that I created a number of years ago was that if you're feeling a certain way and you want to change that feeling to something else, the feeling you might have been perfectly appropriate at a point in time, but at some point, the horrific event you experience, the tragedy you experience, that ends, and you have to then move on. And somehow you found a way to turn that into energy, positive energy. And I watched one of the videos from your website the other night, and I mean, you said it. We can't turn back the clock. We can't go backwards, but we can save other children, and that's what you're talking about now.
Yeah.
And that's taken a probably the worst feeling anybody could ever experience, and trying to make something positive happen, so that you can continue to live and you can continue to fill your life and create even new meaning and incredible meaning, really, where you're making a difference in so many different ways. If people are interested in knowing more about the programs, could you say a little bit about what the programs actually are? Because there's different ones that you offer, I guess. So if you could talk a little bit about what they are, that I think would be helpful.
Sure. We kind of we put them under the heading of Know the Signs, but they break down into. Um, we really just. I'd like to talk about Start with Hello first, actually, and that's a program that targets social isolation, trains students how to recognize peers who are socially isolated, and we've studied this in lots of research to inform us that people who experience chronic social isolation for an extended period of time may be at an increased risk of either being the victim of violence or perpetrating violence. So by training students with the value uh, in reaching out to those people and making them feel included and valued and recognized, even just one conversation can make a huge difference. So Start with Hello. Uh, it's a wonderful program that kind of it's especially personal to me because it's something that our little Daniel used to do on his own. He used to reach out to kids who were sitting alone, and it has a very personal connection for me. Um, but we are celebrating what we call Start with Hello Week coming up at the end of this month from September 23rd through September 27th. September 27th happens to be Daniel's birthday. And it's a national call to action week to draw attention to our Start with Hello program. And we encourage schools to sign up for the free training and really try to drive awareness for the Start with Hello program. So that's a very important program. It has seen huge success. It empowers students, as Doug said. The students own it. It's not coming from their teachers. The students own it. They run it. They manage it, and they see the success. And it's because of the work that they've done. When I go to schools and see the artwork and the awareness days that they've organized and the different, um, you know, components to the program that the students themselves designed, it's so rewarding to me to see these kids just taking this and flying with it and building it to a new level. So that's Start with Hello Week, September 23rd through September 27th across the country.
Before you go on, let me just ask you to talk about what we talked about for a moment downstairs, which was the principal that you talked with about bullying, because that's a great story too.
Sure. Broadview Middle School here in Connecticut, in Danbury, the principal reported after bringing Start with Hello program in that their bullying numbers went to zero. And we've seen numbers like that across the country as well. So the Start with Hello program not only reaches social isolation specifically, it also fosters a more inclusive culture within the school. That's a great place to start when you're looking at the long road of recognizing pathway behaviors to somebody on their way to some kind of trouble. Um, Making people feel connected and included from the outset is a great way to offset a lot of that stuff that will probably never happen down the road. For instance, the individual that shot and killed my little Daniel was severely, chronically socially isolated. And I can't help but think if somebody like my little Daniel had maybe gone over to that guy and had one conversation with him, it could have changed history. And so we've recognized the value and the importance of reaching out to folks who are always feeling alone and invisible.
That's the way yeah. When that first happened, and you read whatever I could about the issue and what happened to him, it seemed to me that there was the same program I started off talking in the show about where I brought kids together and they had a chance to talk in a proactive way about how to deal with feelings and you just mixed groups up so that you didn't sit with just your friends. You sat with all kinds of different individuals, and people found so much in common. Even though they didn't, if they looked at you, they wouldn't know that they had anything in common because you seem to have quite different interests and you look very different from them. And you might practice a different religion. You might be a different color from them. But when you talked about anger, we were talking about the same things. We talked about depression. We're talking about the same things. And we're struggling in the same ways. And you had an idea that I never would have thought of. And maybe you have other ideas that are good too, that I never would have known to talk to you about. And so I think any of these programs, I call them social and emotional learning programs, that we can introduce in the schools. And the fact that you have a school that said it went to zero bullying, that's amazing, right? I mean, all by itself, that's amazing. And there's legislation, I think, trying to look at what do we do to stop bullying. And it seems like we have some answers out there, including your program.
Yeah, well, we're very proud of the Start with Hello program. It is to what you're just mentioning. We have a whole toolkit that comes with it, and one of them is Mix It Up at Lunch, where kids sit with different kids. They pick up a card when they walk in, and it corresponds to a card on a table, and so it kind of forces them to separate into different groups. And then we have all kinds of icebreakers and conversation starters that go with it. What's your favorite color? Who do you like to listen to? Music, sports, and all that. So the kids have a lot of fun with it, and like I said, they add on to it and they build onto it as well. They really embrace it, and it's wonderful to see.
That's great.
Another program we have is called Say Something, and it's more for older kids, middle school, high school, who are involved with social media platforms where they are the eyes and the ears in those platforms. Their parents, their teachers are not seeing the things that they're seeing. So we empower them with this tool to look for and identify behaviors that could be consistent with somebody who's thinking about self-harm or thinking about harming somebody else or anything else. And we train them to identify a trusted adult in their network who may be their parent or who may not be their parent, might be a faith leader or a coach, and tell that trusted adult that, hey, I think this person might need a conversation, or maybe there's some kind of an intervention here. Um, but we understand the stigma around, talking to somebody about one of your peers. So in answer to that, we've developed an anonymous reporting system, which is a tool that the kids can use to connect with a crisis center that's staffed with trained professionals who are multilingual, who can then triage that tip and connect that individual with whatever services they need, whether it's in the school or outside of the school. And we've seen tremendous success with not only the Say Something program, but with the anonymous reporting system. The students are empowered. They take this seriously, and they're empowered with this tool, with the responsibility to look out for their peers. This isn't snitching. It's not labeling. It's looking out for one another. It's being a responsible upstander. And the kids treat that seriously. They take that responsibility seriously. And we have made countless interventions already. The state of Pennsylvania, the Attorney General's office said we want to mandate this for every one of our middle and high school students across the state. So we are now launching our anonymous reporting system and Say Something program throughout the state of Pennsylvania. Next is North Carolina. So we're moving to this statewide model where we can capture and train and give this free service to more and more students.
It's scalable, right? So it's on their phone. The app.
So yeah, the app. What happens is we train the district. We train the students, the teachers, the parents. We identify whatever first responders or support services are in that district or in the state, and then the crisis center has all that information. So there's an app the kids have on their phone, or the adults. They send a tip in either by text or phone call or any other social media platform. They can send a tip in. The crisis center gets that information. They know where it's coming from, so they know who the appropriate services are. So the crisis center then triages that information. Basically, they start with two buckets. If it's an immediate life safety issue, they get first responders to the scene immediately. If it's anything else, if it's somebody who's pulling hair on the bus, it was somebody talking about shooting up the school, whatever it is, the crisis counselor has access to whatever appropriate intervention services are available to them in that district, and then makes that connection at the appropriate time. So the principal's not getting a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning because somebody was pulling hair on the bus. But if it's something more serious, then the intervention or the call or the services will be contacted at the appropriate time.
That's great because timing is such an issue sometimes. And so 911 has a lag to it, and with the anonymous reporting app having all of that information kind of preloaded as to which bucket to look at is
Right.
is really important.
Other similar services are more of a conduit that just throw it over the wall to 911,
Right.
to police responders, and it just kind of overwhelms them. So these are trained professionals who are certified, they're multilingual, and they can triage that information, and a lot of it doesn't have to go to law enforcement.
That's terrific.
So one of the things that it strikes me is that you have a lot of great ideas. It's grown organically. It sounds like you didn't. I don't know what you dreamed about when you first started out. You just knew you wanted to do something that was going to make a difference, and you're making an incredible difference. Have you thought in terms of scaling up somehow? Is it just kind of organically growing, or what are your plans? Because it seems like it would be great if everybody knew these programs were out there and that they're making this kind of difference. Because why wouldn't somebody stop and figure out, why aren't we doing this here?
Yeah, well, so it's both. Thanks for asking that question. We did set out on a mission. The most basic level, our mission was to prevent other families from having to live this pain, and by learning that this is preventable. Through a lot of trial and error, a lot of research, a lot of conversations with thought leaders across the country, stakeholders of all kinds, we started to arrive on this the mission and the strategy that we're pursuing now. there were a lot of other wonderful organizations doing lots of good work, and we didn't want to duplicate that work. We wanted to find our own lane in the highway, or our own unique place that we could make a contribution to this. And we found that there was not a whole lot of work done in the specific space of evidence-based violence prevention programs for students. And we found that we could have a significant impact there. And in terms of scaling, we are a nonprofit, right? And everything we do is based on the donation, the generosity of donors, because we don't want cost to be a barrier to saving lives. So we want to continue to offer these programs at no cost. So that's a tall order, and especially when you're trying to do that at scale. Nonetheless, we have a lot of generous donors out there who give $5 a month, or donate their time, or try to spread the awareness. And then we have a lot of high net wealth individuals who donate much larger sums. We have grant programs now that we're working with, so that we can continue to build this to scale. We are in all 50 states now. We do have a vast network of not only employees across the country, but also promise presenters, promise leaders, and volunteers who help us do this work. To date, we have trained over 7.5 million students and adults in our Know the Signs programs at no cost. And we are continuing to build that to scale. And to add to that, to add to our challenge, we place a priority on sustainability. And what I mean by that is we don't just drop off these programs at the school and say, there you go, have fun with that, hope it works. We don't do that. My wife is a career educator. She was in the Bronx for years, and now she's in New York State, up in Dutchess County. And she told us at the outset, we have seen so many wonderful programs come with a great presentation, and then they leave, and we're left trying to figure out what to do with this. So we wanted to make sure that our programs were really built into the culture and the climate of the school in a meaningful way, so that they would work and they'd have the most impact that they could have. And so that's what we do. In the larger districts, we actually have a staff that goes in and keeps the programs going within the schools. We have a digital component where a school district can download and self-lead and sustain our programs through an interactive digital platform. So we place a priority on sustainability so that the programs are really built into the culture of the school. Students can train other students. And we have what are called Save Promise Clubs, which is a wonderful network of student-led clubs across the country that can build our programs into the school. And the Save Promise Clubs are a really great way to sustain the programs, keep it in the school. Students can train incoming students and then continue to maintain those programs.
Pretty exciting work. It seems like you're also expanding pretty exponentially. Do you have any? What's the size of your staff? Do you have paid staff? I imagine that you have like an internal organization. Is it a small group of people, large group of people?
We have, I think, approximately 35 paid staff at our office in Newtown. We have, again, that number out in the field. And then we have contractors, and we have, like I said, support staff, promise leaders, folks like Doug, who are out there helping us in every way they can. So, we, like I said, we also place a priority on fidelity. We will never sacrifice speed of scale over fidelity. We have to maintain 100% fidelity with our programs to make sure they're working as they should. And we're doing studies right now through University of Michigan and others to really learn more about how effective our programs are, how we can make them better, getting the feedback from the field as how we can continually improve them. So we want to place a priority on fidelity and sustainability for the programs.
Is any of the work that you're doing help people, kids, parents, teachers, administrators to manage their emotions more successfully? Where are you on that?
So a long time ago, we kind of, again, through research and through interviewing thought leaders, we learned, as Doug mentioned before, a lot of times, there was a story about a guy who shot some kids in a gas station who were playing the music too loud. There's a story about somebody shooting somebody in a movie theater because they were throwing their popcorn around. That may not be, it's probably not the result of a diagnosable mental illness, but
Right.
It's certainly a lack of coping skills. It's certainly, a lack of anger management. And Doug said this so eloquently before that I think it's really irresponsible and really wrong to conflate mental illness with the violence that we're seeing in our country, with the mass shootings.
Right.
Another thing that we tend to not talk about is the daily shootings and violence that's happening in our cities across the country every single day. And these families are living this same pain that I'm living with. Every single day there are more families that are coming into that awful club. And so I think it's really wrong and irresponsible, and it's to conflate that with mental illness. But we can talk in terms of a lack of mental wellness, or a general state of mental wellness. And I feel that teaching kids the value and the importance of connecting with people who are left out and ostracized and feeling invisible, teaching them the value of connecting with that individual in some way, while still respecting their right to privacy, while still respecting healthy alone time,
Right.
but also making them feel included and valued, is so important. And I think it speaks to a broader general mental wellness component that we want to foster in our schools and our communities. Same thing with the Say Something program. It teaches students the value of looking out for one another. Hey, I see that you're hurting, or maybe you're feeling angry, or something else that could be harmful to you. I want to step in and help you. We train kids with the value of that, and the importance of that, and they respond to it. They really want to be that upstander.
It's interesting. One of the things that I've been doing for the last 20 some years is working in this field called emotional intelligence. And there's a science that's emerged that is pretty interesting, in the sense that um, we often think about emotions and managing emotions as things people either do or don't do well, but we don't think of them necessarily as abilities. And that's new, to think about the fact that some people actually don't have certain abilities to perceive emotions in themselves or others, to use emotions effectively, to understand how emotions work, or to manage emotions. So, what this show's been about for the last 10 years that I've been doing this is trying to encourage people to think about, if what you're feeling isn't helpful. And at some point, as I said, someone called in this and today's show early. Today's show being a week before this recording, and was really upset about something going on in her life that she had no control over. She had a medical condition; she wasn't getting the help she needed. But she found that when she got upset, it aggravated the physical condition. And so, on one hand, what we know about emotions from the intelligence angle is that when you feel there's an injustice, that the system isn't servicing you correctly, that anger and upset is an appropriate response. But at some point, the anger dissipates. It should dissipate, because it's not helpful anymore. It's not, if you can change what's happening so it's more just than what you're experiencing, great. If you can't, and you know that this anger and upset feeling actually aggravates your medical condition, then you've got to get off that path. Every time the thought enters your mind about the system isn't serving me, that pathway ends poorly for you.
Well, you think about this. Yoga is really hard when you start.
Closer to the mic, so.
Yoga is really hard when you start to try to do it, but
Right.
once you practice it, it becomes easier and easier and easier. It's the same thing with running a marathon. You don't get off the couch and run a marathon, but you gradually practice, and you became able to run that distance. Not every day. It's the same thing with emotional intelligence, and you're familiar with Bandera and his work in California in terms of positive efficacy, thinking the right things, thinking good thoughts, practicing, not negativity, but positivity. It's a practice, and it's something that that does work to bring about positive responses. And so the Sandy Hook Promise Start with Hello program, is really about that. It's about trying to change behaviors, and changing behaviors changes patterns of thinking, right? In a certain way. One of the other ways of reducing stress, and filtering out anger in appropriate ways, is to just go for a run. And one of the things that I posted on the Sandy Hook Promise leaders page yesterday was a piece in Runner's World magazine, where a school in Philadelphia, actually a number of schools, it's not a track team, just a group of students that get together with student leaders and parents, and they just go for a run, and they build to a certain race. And the fact that they can just do that without being timed or measured or competitive is great, because brings people together. They feel good. They've achieved a goal, and it's a wonderful transformational thing. So it's all linked with emotional intelligence, very positive outcomes at a very low cost. And these are things that we can do ourselves.
Right. Meditation, exercise,
Right.
lots of rest, good diet. There's so many things we can do. Having said that, though, what's unique at this point, and what I was encouraging her to understand, is that this is what's been amazing about emotional intelligence to me over the last 20 or so years, is that we have so much more power over our emotions than we ever believed. And that's unique. And also the idea that there are certain emotions that are better for particular tasks than other emotions. So while anger and upset is appropriate for injustice, at some point it isn't anymore. And so how do you want to respond? And that's what this show is about, is trying to teach people. And I think one of the things you might look into as you explore where else you can go, new product development for your nonprofit, is the idea of how do we help kids who are feeling things that are not helpful to them to feel differently, to recognize, especially years ago I used to be a therapist, and one of the things that I noticed is that themes emerge. And when a theme emerges, it's a recognition that there's a pattern you're on. And I now call those pathways. So when I'm on a path that I know doesn't end well, I'm much quicker to get off it than I ever was before. And that's what you can teach. So I think part of this is like, the reaching out that you're doing, the way that you've lowered bullying. I mean, that's amazing. But another approach is that what's going on internally inside everybody really, whether it's not just kids, it's the gas station attendant you talked about. What is he saying to himself, right? I mean, all this is and it's not psychologically necessarily a category that would fit into a textbook of psychology, but nevertheless, these are bizarre behaviors that aren't appropriate, and yet we all carry certain things. I'm sure even on your drive down here, you might have seen somebody texting and somebody with a suit on. I mean, we do things that have no rational component to them. And yet they still happen. And so when you really want to change behavior so it's sustainable, your word before, to me, you have to understand what emotions are driving the thoughts, driving the behaviors, and how do you change those emotions. And if you can't change the emotion, how do you meet the need in a different way that isn't destructive? And the beauty of emotional intelligence is that if we know that certain emotions are better than other emotions, then if we stop, and this is one of the ways to train people on this, is to say, spend 3 times a day. A lot of people carrying smartphones now, diary at 10:30 and 2:30 and 7:30. Just ask yourself, how are you feeling? Is it how you want to feel? And if it's not, what would be ideal? As soon as you ask that question and you realize what you're feeling isn't helpful and isn't ideal, your mind races to figure out, how do I get that feeling that is ideal? And you do it for other people too. And that's what the show's about. That's what I'm trying to do here for all these years.
That's
And
right.
I think that's what your program does in some ways, right? It's taking all these people who are feeling helpless about this and making them feel hopeful. Just listening to you talk about what you're doing, there's joy and there's pride in what you've come to know about this, and why you wanted to share it on the radio like this.
But like it was Mark, when you see the kids, work, take it over themselves and do the driving. That's what's amazing, because they are not only the canaries in a coal mine, to tell us what's happening, but they're also the people that really are can define their world. So so that's really, and it's not going to be too much longer before the middle school and the high schoolers go into the community as college students and get their first jobs. And so changing the culture at that level is what's going to change the culture of our country.
That's true, and we've long said that we're looking at this through a multi-generational lens, and I think that's how this is going to happen. This is, I can't help the pun, but it is a marathon,
Yes, it is.
and
Right.
it does take changing attitudes and behaviors over a long period of time, and then bringing that into successive generations. And I think that's how we're going to see the real change is if we treat this as a social movement, which it is, and it should be. And look at it through a multi-generational lens. I think we can move our culture in a positive direction.
It's interesting. One of the other thoughts I've had about this world of emotion is that if you think about someone that you might know and have to interact with in some way, whether in your community or in your workplace, that is annoying in some ways, and you find it's annoying, and maybe you even said something about it, but it didn't get any better. And you sort of think of that person, often we do anyway, as having sort of a bad attitude. They just don't seem to care about other people. But if you think about the idea of emotional intelligence abilities, and you ask yourself, I wonder if this is attitude or ability. I wonder if this person doesn't have any idea, can't have any idea, is unable to have any idea about how he's making me and others feel, or how he or she is. And if you start to think that maybe the person that I'm thinking I'm having a problem with isn't about attitude, but it's about ability, it changes the way we think about that person. It's a game changer. And if we think about, remember years ago in learning in classrooms and education, we didn't often know that there was such a thing as learning disabilities. We just thought for some reason kids that looked like they might be smart weren't learning to read the same way the other kids were. And so I guess they aren't smart. And we thought of them as, dumb or retarded was the word that people used. And then somebody said, well, wait a minute, maybe it's just because they learn differently. And we discovered the idea of learning disabilities. And now pretty much everybody accepts that people learn differently. They don't always deal with it effectively, but they recognize that it's out there. Well, I think over time we're going to recognize that certain people, whether kids or adults, have emotional disabilities too. No one's really talking about that. But if somebody has an emotional disability, i.e. they can't identify how they're feeling or others are feeling in reaction to them, they don't recognize what's the best emotion to try and get people to feel, creative and feel like a group or a team. And they don't understand how emotions work, and they don't know what motivates people or how even to motivate themselves. And they don't manage emotions well. If those are abilities, and we can teach people strategies on each of those pieces about how to grow those abilities, again, I think the world's a better place. So I think that's all possible. That's the marathon I'm on. Trying to figure out how to help the world learn how to do these things.
No, and I think it's said that you can see a person's soul in their eyes, and so often there's not a lot of eye contact. We're in a hurry. We say, "How are you?" We don't listen to the answer. So to slow things down a little bit, and that's what they do so well. In the schools that have adopted the Start with Hello programs, it slows things down and it gets people to look at each other and mixes things up. And I love teachers who take a child and at every start of class he gets to shake everybody's hand as the students come in. Sometimes the students will hug that child. It breaks down the barriers to allow the kids to show their emotions, and when that scales up, as you were saying, when you grow up, adults want to do the same thing. Sometimes we're a little bit more hidebound. We don't want to show our emotions too much. But when we stop and we look in people's eyes, say hello, how are you? Maybe listen to the answer, ask a follow-up question. Good things can happen.
Right. You said earlier that you don't. It's not about political, and it tend to be very civil towards other groups, and at least the Sandy Hook group does. And you don't try to get government policies implemented. I think did I hear that right?
Well, I said we don't engage in the traditional quote unquote gun violence prevention legislative path as a priority. We feel that if we can do our work on the front end, train students, how to recognize warning signs, that we can offset a lot. We just want to have an impact, and we want to reach as many people as we can. So we feel like this is if we can stay away from the argument over rights versus freedoms,
right.
We can just be more effective. We can just reach more people, and we can get more work done and have a greater impact. And that's really, at the end of the day, what we want to do is we want to save lives. And if it takes getting it away from the politics of it, then we have found an effective way to do that. And we are still involved with policy and politics. We still do advocate for policies that make sense. With regard to what we're doing, we feel that everybody who transfers a firearm should do so with a background check. We are strong supporters of the Extreme Risk Protection Order.
You want to say more about what that is? Because I don't think everybody. That's a red flag law that people are talking about, taking guns away from people that have shown that they're potentially violent against themselves or others, right?
Right. So it's kind of what I like to call it the policy component or counterpart to the trainings that we offer. We train people how to recognize warning signs and connect somebody with whatever help or services they need. The Extreme Risk Protection Order or red flag law empowers families with that tool if they witness a family member who is a clear and present danger to themselves or somebody else in the household. They can petition the court or law enforcement to come make that same evaluation. And based on making that same evaluation, they can safely store their firearms in another location until that person is out of crisis. There is a due process where they can then get their firearms returned to them. I don't even use the language taking away their firearms because that scares people. It's not really what it is.
Right.
It is literally safely storing them somewhere else until that person is no longer an imminent danger to themselves or others. And there is a due process for which that person can receive their firearms back again. And so the most important, I think, part that sometimes gets overlooked with that is the training, the education, and the awareness. First, that tool exists in some states, and I think it'd be great to have that at the national level as well. But also with the training, so that folks know that they have access to that. So a family who is in the midst of a domestic violence crisis, or somebody who is showing warning signs of suicide, can know that they have this tool at their disposal. Somebody who's talking about committing a mass shooting knows that they have that tool at their disposal, and they can say, "Hey, I think we want to enact this, and get this person separated from their firearms and get them to the help that they need, and avoid a tragedy."
See, that sounds great to me. One of the things that strikes me about your program is it's been sort of, as I said, organically grown. And so it's been without government support, I guess. It's been primarily just donors.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do everything we do. That being said, we are also pursuing state mandates to policy mandates to mandate our program training in their states, or Know the Science programs. We are working that at a deliberate pace because we have to be able to keep up with the demand so that we can deliver that, with 100% fidelity. But we have a wonderful group of folks who work in Washington, D.C. We have a little office down there, and we have an incredible team down there who is working on policy in different states to get our Know the Science programs implemented mandated at a state level. A few here, one or two at a time, as we can keep up with the demand. We also were instrumental in getting the 21st Century Cures Act. There was a component of that called the Mental Health Act of 2016, which afforded folks more access to quality mental health care. We helped that along. It was the last piece of legislation that President Obama signed into law in 2016. We were very proud of that. And then subsequently, we have also passed a funding bill, which is called the Stop School Violence Act, which allows states and school districts to apply for grant funding to train in evidence-based violence prevention programs like what we do at Sandy Hook Promise. So we do also function and work at the policy legislative level, both at state and in the federal government.
I wonder, is Johanna Hayes your representative where you are in Newtown?
She is.
Oh, so yeah, have you been in touch with, as an educator, a former educator, I think she'd be a big supporter.
And yes, she is. We have close relationships with all of our Connecticut delegation, and they've all been wonderful partners in advancing and helping us do our work, both at the federal level and at the state level. Our senators and our members of Congress have all been wonderful allies.
Have you tried to reach the White House? The only reason I asked is because I was telling you downstairs. I just this morning, I guess I was reading that Mitch McConnell in the Senate had said, "I'm waiting for the president to drive what we do." It seems to me this is all the things that you're advocating seem to be no-brainer. I don't see why anybody would object to any of the stuff that you're doing in Sandy Hook.
Well, the curious part about that is, Chuck, is that most people don't object to it. Poll after poll after poll shows public support for universal background checks in the high 90s, 95, 97%. That includes gun owners all across the political spectrum, pretty much everybody. And I mean, favor for closing the loophole in the federal background check system is higher than anything, higher than ice cream in this country. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So the support is there.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking more of the program Sandy Hook is promoting, the Know the Signs program, the Say Hello program. The funding for those programs as a proactive step to reduce gun violence seems brilliant to me that nobody could object to. I don't see the NRA or anybody else.
Yeah,
this has nothing to do with whether you own a gun or not. This is about helping people become mentally healthy and reaching out and making sure everybody's okay.
Yeah, we work closely with the Obama administration when we're really just getting this started during that administration. But I have consulted with this current administration and have explained to them that we are standing ready and poised to help them solve this problem in our own way. We would have to really staff up to do this at a larger scale. But
Yeah.
if the federal government could step in and help us do that, we could meet the demand if we had the resources to do so.
Well, there's a group called the Problem Solvers. Do you ever hear of them? So when the election happened in 2016 and family members stopped talking to each other, depending on what side of the conversation they were on. My show is about helping, and to me, family is the most important thing. And I thought that's not right. I mean, you might not agree on who got elected, but you shouldn't stop talking to your family members. That seems wrong to me. So I tried to figure out what was happening and why was this one so contentious in so many different ways. Anyway, I wanted to do something about it. And so there's a group out there called No Labels. And No Labels is about bipartisanship. They don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat. What they care about, are you willing to listen to anyone who has a good idea and then work together? And they were influential in creating this group in Congress called the Problem Solvers. And they had an influence on the speaker this year, when Nancy Pelosi got elected as speaker, because she didn't have the votes without them all agreeing that they would vote for her unless she changed the rules to allow legislation that enough people wanted. But if Nancy's, or before her, Paul Ryan's party didn't want it, he wouldn't bring it up, even if they had a majority of people in Congress that wanted to bring it up. And there's reasons for that go into the weeds, not worth talking about. But they're a group that have an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. If they have legislation that they support, they have pledged to go past what their party says is important and to bring it up. And they have ways to get it on the floor now. So and we can talk offline about this, but there's ways to get in touch with them. And I got to believe that they'd be extremely supportive of the kind of programs you're doing. Again, everybody wants to do something. It's kind of like you did as an individual, Doug. I think the country feels like, come on, we need to do something. And I don't see anybody saying anything no or being negative about the know the signs and say hello programs.
Yeah.
I mean, those things, again, why aren't we doing that everywhere? That's how I feel about it. And maybe that's another group to reach out to.
Well, I appreciate that you recognize that, Chuck, and we feel the same way. And I mean, we work hard to be universally appealing so we can get our work done, so we can have more of an impact. We used to say, where can we start the conversation? Where can we come from a place where we agree? Where can we start it from there? Let's start with what we agree on. We can all agree that we want to protect our children. We can all agree that we want our communities to be safer. So we feel like if we start the conversation from there, much like your problem solvers people, let's just forget about the partisan politics and get some work done. And there's a lot of opportunity to do that. There's a lot of opportunity to reach across the aisle and come together with no matter what your political stripe is and get some good work done. We have so much potential.
Well, let's see if we can make that happen. I've got thoughts are racing, so I'll think about that.
I hope your listeners' thoughts are racing too, and I hope it inspires them to action. And hopefully, they'll do exactly what Doug did and come to the sandyhookpromise.org website and find a place where they can become involved.
So there's two ways of getting involved initially. One is to become a promise leader, and another is to become a donor. Are there other ways that people might get involved? Are those the two?
It's pretty much a continuum. I would say, like Mark said. First of all, we have to want to make a promise to do everything we can to reduce gun violence in our community. Once we've made that promise to ourselves, then we can go onto the Sandy Hook Promise webpage and make that promise. And then from there we can decide, what we're good at. Some of us can give $5 a month. Some of us can set a table up in the library. But we all can do something, and so the resources are all there. I would encourage everybody to have a look at. Encourage my own family to have a look at the Sandy Hook Promise website and just become familiar with it and read through, look at some of the videos, but certainly make that promise as very quick to do. And I think we all want to see this epidemic of gun violence not go into another generation because it's so costly.
All you have to do is read the news any day of the week and know that doing nothing is not an option. And yes, as Doug just said, we do offer a variety of levels of engagement. At the very least, you can come to the website and just make the promise and just become informed with what we're doing. And then from there, there's lots of options for engagement to help volunteer, spread the word, share the word on social media, have conversations in your community with your families, donate. We need dollars so we can continue to bring our programs to schools for no cost. There's so many different things you can do to be part of this, and then you're part of the solution.
Well, this has been great. I would ask you to comment a little bit about Ethan's Law. I guess that's one we didn't really talk about, and that's a little different.
Did you help Kristen and Mike Song craft that legislation here in Connecticut to close a loophole in the law to hold gun owners responsible for securing their weapons?
Yeah, I've gotten to know them quite well. I'm very fond of Kristen and Mike and their family, and their story is compelling. I did not actually write the legislation, but I've been with them at many of their milestones along the way, and they've done great work, and I'm sure they've already saved lives with that wonderful. If nothing else, it's a piece of awareness on the responsibility of safely storing your firearm, so the horrible accident, tragedy, misuse, whatever you want to call it, doesn't happen to other families.
Nobody should have access to a firearm who isn't properly trained and registered to use it. And September is Suicide Prevention Month, and 60% of gun deaths in the U.S. are suicides, and people who want to hurt themselves tend not to go out and buy a new weapon. They borrow it from a family member or a friend who's put it into a shoebox with the ammo, and that type of thing is irresponsible in the extreme. And so many weapons are legacy weapons. They're kind of handed down from their grandfather's guns or something like that, and they're not wanted anymore. And one of the things that the Songs organized in Guilford was a buyback, and hundreds of guns were sold back to the police to be decommissioned and turned into tools. So it's a model. It's a Connecticut piece of legislation that was crafted out of a tragedy in Guilford, and Kristen Song, who wanted to be here today, she's in Washington D.C. advocating for just that at a national level.
So thank you for sharing that too. It seems to me that if you've got kids and you're sending them over to somebody's home and you know that they have a permit for a gun, you certainly want to know that it's locked up, or you don't want to send your kids.
Well, you ask if they have smoke detectors, or but nobody's in the habit of asking, are your guns secure? And that's something that we certainly should do. And people are sometimes offended at the question, but it's really a very, very important point. Is there's a lot of weapons in homes, or is your house a safe home?
Right. Well, lots to think about, and so much that you folks are being successful with. I think the story about the principal and Danbury and the no bullying is kind of symbolic of the efforts you're making, and also the fact that you've saved countless lives, who knows how many, and the fact that these programs have illuminated where there's potential for danger and for harm to be done, and you've stopped that. That's just incredible. So appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming on and sharing about this. If people want to get in touch, they know it's just sandyhookpromise.org. I think is that right?
sandyhookpromise.org. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Thank you both for being on the show. You've been listening to WPKN 89.5 FM in Bridgeport, Connecticut. This is Chuck Wolf, the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.